All right. About Mekas clouds. So we provide cloud strategic solutions to our customers, starting from strategy to all the way to deployment, design, and automation part of it. And we are also managed cloud service providers, and we help the customers with cloud migrations. And do we do have a DevOps team that does infrastructure as code, and we also help our customers with 24 by 7 monitoring and support for any cloud, just not Google Cloud. And we also have a on-demand support model. If you're interested, you can go to www.mekas.com and you can check it. We are Google Cloud partners. We've been partners for almost 3 years now, and we help a lot of Google customers, including healthcare, including FSI, financial industries, and ad tech, telcos. We have helped many customers in strategizing their cloud and architecting their hybrid cloud models, and migrating and data center exit also. About me, on the right side, the picture is it's me. I have 20 plus years of experience in data center, building the data centers, building the networks, managing the infrastructure, managing 24 by 7 infrastructure operations. And I am a Google Cloud certified uh, professional cloud architect and security architect and network engineer. And I'm the founder of Mekas Cloud Services. If you want to reach me, my Twitter is Raj Meka, and you can also reach me at raj@mekas.com. All right. About when it comes to security, you always feel hard to create a secure cloud environment, especially when you're coming from a data center on-prem model to cloud model. It's not always the same, and cloud services are being created and destroyed every minute, especially when you have the automation part of it. You're continuously creating and destroying it, and that's about the cloud, right? So that's the beauty of cloud. But when it comes to security, it's hard to control what is deployed, what is destroyed, and how do you track it. Security is always changing, right? There are new threats every week. Actually, I was talking about in one of the blog interview how security is changing, and how the security engineers need to adopt the new technologies and new threats, and how do you handle that. And it's hard to find the experienced cloud security practitioners, especially. We've been hiring, and it's hard to find, especially Google Cloud security engineers. And you can find a lot of cybersecurity engineers or on-prem security engineers, but hard to find the cloud security practitioners, right? How do you keep your environment secure while staying abreast latest security solutions? So that's the challenges that every cloud practitioner is having. And luckily, there are on Google Cloud side, there are a lot of native tools that are available, and Google also publishes the um, security blueprints and shared responsibilities. What are the shared responsibility models? So you need to take a look at those. Probably I can provide those. Those are publicly available documents. I can share those later in the email. Right. What are the complicating factors in cloud? Right. Um, so in terms of perimeter security model, right? So when you are on data centers, so you know what are your perimeters are. You know what to be protected, right? Everything is inside a data center. You're a physical, and you have cameras to monitor. You have your security keys. You have racks, and racks are secured. Physical security is taken care, and on top of it, you have your edge routers and secure firewalls, and your IPS, IDS. Everything is installed. Anything before coming inside, you're protecting everything, including DDoS and WAF, and everything is there. So you know your perimeter and you know how to protect it. But when it comes to cloud, you don't know anything about the what perimeters are, right? It's sitting anywhere inside somebody else is managing, right? And services are launched every week, every minute, if I say, right? How do you stay on top of how to secure each one of the service? So you need your DevOps engineers or your application engineers, they need to take advantage of these on-demand deployments and scaling up or scaling down, right? So how do you secure all of those? Right? Cloud appears to require new skills from your security practitioners. Definitely, it's not same as on-prem security. If you try to implement, even let's say if you have security controls on-prem, it's not going to be the same on cloud side. It doesn't matter which cloud is it, Google Cloud, AWS, Azure. It's all of them. You need to adopt new security controls. How do you know if you have a right security solution in place? Right? You have to look at the entire stack, and then what are your perimeters, and then what are your how are you protecting your VMs, and how are you protecting your application, and you need to know all these areas, right? So in terms of what is happening, cloud builds upon a perimeter security model with new security controls. We talked about it, and you can leverage on GCP side, especially, you can leverage different controls to manage how and when new securities are introduced into your organization. Um, and coding skills are beneficial, especially when you're doing the DevOps and automating your infrastructure, right? They make sure your team's coding skills are good, and at the same time, you are scanning your code for the security, any vulnerabilities or any malicious code, right? And working with Mekas, we ensure that you are working with the people that know cloud security the best. We worked with many, as I said, healthcare. So there are a lot of compliance, right? Strict compliance, HIPAA, PCI. We work with banks, and there are a lot of strong security requirements on FSI. You need to protect PII data, right? And large telco networks. So we help you to secure your best practices. Before I jump on to so this one is about what all are involved in the cloud security, and then I divided um, the sessions into 4 sessions. The series, every week I'm going to cover one of these topics. So we are not covering everything in one day, right? That's too much to absorb, especially if you are new to the cloud, right? So we're going to cover resources management. So in GCP, I hope you have some knowledge of working with GCP or any cloud. That helps. Otherwise, um, it's not going to be easy to understand, follow this one, especially when you're coming for security. This is not just a foundations, right? So foundations probably I'll cover later. Resource management. So what are the resources, right? In GCP world, resources are your org is a one resource. What is an org, right? It's a top level node that is sitting on top of everything. In your organization, if you take the CEO as the top, right? Your company is the org. And in GCP, org hierarchy will be covering, and what environments, or how do you isolate your resources. GCP, you can divide into you can set your org into folders, subfolders, and then projects, and then resources, right? So your resources are sitting underneath it, but on the top of it, you can arrange your resources. Under the resource management, we have the project creation, resource provisioning, and the organization policies. We talk about the organization policies later. This is one way to secure your organization also with the policies, right, at the organization level. But these can be applied at folder level and project level also. And identity authentication and authorization. This covers who can do what, who is the user, which user can log into it, and then you authenticate, and then what resources these users will have, right? That's what we'll be covering in typically it's called IAM, right? And the network security. So network, in any cloud, we use VPC. We cover the VPC architecture. What are the firewall rules? and network logging, VPC service controls. These are common in any cloud, right? VPC architecture, firewall rules, network logging, but VPC service controls is specific to GCP, where you protect your projects or your services with the VPC service controls on top of your firewall rules. DDoS and WAF and identity-aware proxy are part of the network security. And VM securities. How do you harden your VM images, and how do you, sorry, yeah, how do you provide ooh, okay, here you go, and image management. Data security, what are your encryption methods? What is your storage strategy? How do you secure your storage? That could be your disks or cloud storage, your buckets, right? And BigQuery, these are managed services. So for example, BigQuery, Cloud SQL, managed services. How do you protect those? And there is another service is called data loss prevention. How do you protect your data exfiltration, right? And if there is, how do you anonymize if you have a PII data? How do you encrypt those data, right? And security operations, logging is very important. Audit logging, monitoring policies, will be covering those. And, okay, jumping now to Google Cloud security. So what do we have in GCP security, right? It's, if you take the layer security model in Google Cloud, the outer circle, if you look at this org policies, and org policies covers the control the services through native policies, right? For example, right, if you have the VMs, and if you give a public IP, anybody can access your VMs through public IP, and you want to control that as a security engineer or security architect. You don't want anybody to give a public IP to VM. You want the DevOps engineer to be able to deploy, your application engineer deploy VMs, your application engineers to be able to deploy VMs. But you want those to be stay inside your network. Don't give access to public, right? Disable the public IP. So that's what you'll be able to do at the org policies. You set the org policies, say that no public IP will be available, right? Then nobody will be able to create, right? So there are many organization level policies you can apply at the organization level, and also you can apply at the project level or folder level. Um, that's at the org level. And VPC service controls, I think, as I was talking about the VPC service controls, they are also applied at the org level. And when you apply at the org level, you protect a single project or multiple projects with the VPC service controls. So what can you do with the VPC service controls, right? You can protect a project, entire project, every service inside the project, or you can pick a project, and you can pick a service. Let's say, for example, we talked about BigQuery, right? You pick a service. So I want to protect this service exposing outside. This is a managed service. Your typical firewall rules, your network firewall rules doesn't apply to a managed services. If you know, at least if you work with the GCP, right? A regular VPC firewall rules don't apply to the managed services, right? Then how do you protect VPC service controls? You define who can access your BigQuery inside the project, and also not only who, you can define which IP service IPs you want to allow. Did somebody join? Sorry. Yeah. So the VP with the VPC service controls, you can control at the user level. You can control at the OS level, which OS can access your which browser can access, which OS can access. Also IP list, right? You can create an allow list to allow access to your BigQuery or Cloud SQL or any other managed services. At the same time, you can also create which project internally. If you have multiple projects, you can define which project can communicate with your BigQuery, inside a different projects, right? So you can control at that level with the VPC service controls. And getting into the second layer, right? Global load balancing. At the combination of global load balancing and cloud armor, now you have the workloads inside. You don't have any. You don't have way to access your VMs because you are. Let's say you are restricting your public IP. So VM doesn't have any public IP. You shouldn't be allowing any public IPs to VMs. Then how do you access your services running on VMs, right? Load balancer. So you create a VM and then put them behind the load balancer. That is one of them. Is there are different types of load balancers in GCP. Global load balancer allow HTTPS access from outside uh, uh, internet to your VMs, right? There are other TCP load balancers and SSL load balancers. There are internal load balancers, external load balancers. So the combination of global load balancer and cloud armor will help you to protect, right? Prevent the DDoS attacks. You can mitigate the DDoS attacks, and also cloud armor can act as a web app firewall, right? The WAF capabilities, OAuth-based firewall rules you can create. So there you can create allow list and deny list for the IPs. Same time, and you can configure DDoS configuration. So the beauty of the good thing about using the cloud load balancers, your VMs are inside, they are protected, they're not exposed to internet. And when you are using the load balancers, who manages the load balancers? These are load balancers are managed services, right? Software defined. Those are managed by Google itself. And when the Google is managed, they provide the SLAs to take care of it. Unlike on-prem, if you have a load balancer, it's a physical appliance, and you need to make sure that you create the HA for it, right? You deploy multiple load balancers, you configure. If one goes down, another one is taking care of it. But in case of cloud, any cloud, right, load balancers are taken care by the provider, in this case Google. So Google takes, there is a, since they are managed by Google itself, so before any traffic, any customer hit the load balancer, it has to go through the Google front end, right? It's called GFE, if you can read online, right? So the GFE, the basic DDoS has been already taken care. Google will take care of it. On top of it, if you add a cloud armor to Google load balancing, global load balancer, then you can define your own DDoS rules. And of course, see, if your application is open, if somebody is coming on your port 80 or port 443, Google doesn't stop it, right? So there you can define, okay, what is my, where should I stop them, right? What is the what is my DDoS rule or WAF rules? What is the IP list, allow list, and deny list? So with that one, Cloud Armor, you can do that. And Cloud NAT as any NAT, if you don't have a public IP to your VM, and then you need to download some patches, or your VM has a requirement to reach out to the internet for third-party services, then you need to have a NAT, right? So what you need to do is you need to create a NAT. And good thing about NAT is you can also create some rules, policies on the NAT, which which you can define what VMs can reach out, use the NAT, right? At the same time, you need to have a cloud router for any NAT, right? So when you are creating a cloud router, you can also follow the tagging. Google uses network tags for any resources, and then you can use those network tags to attach to the VMs, so that if your VM has that network tag, it can use the router. Otherwise, they cannot. So that's one way to secure VMs reaching out to the internet. Also, you remove the default network and then use your custom NAT and the routes to protect VMs reaching out to the internet. Also, that's another layer. And one more layer we have is, of course, the Google VPC network is similar to your actually now inside your network, data center network, right? The difference between Google VPC network and other cloud vendors VPC network is Google's VPC network is global, and you create a VPC, and then that VPC is available across the globe, all regions. And how do you separate the regions? The regions are separated by subnets. So each subnet belongs to a single region, and there are multiple zones inside a single region, right? Um, and how do you protect this network? Firewall rules, right? Again, you create the VPC firewall rules. If you before the firewall rules, you have a global load balancer, cloud armor. Even it reaches you're protecting there, and then even before that, you have the VPC service controls protecting your projects, and then now it is VPC service controls are completely VPC firewall rules are completely under your controls. This is where you add ingress and egress rules. Um, for your any workload, any request coming inside or any request going outside, you define here. There are default by default egress is allowed, but with the priority you can change those egress also. You can deny all. um, to secure your workloads, I would always recommend you start with the deny all as a security engineer, ingress and egress, and then create what is needed to allow, right? That's what I would do if I'm a security engineer. And the VPC firewall rules, there is a different ways. We talk about that later when I'm talking about VPC firewall rules. Yeah, and this is all protecting. Now, how do we do the detective, right? So who is doing what, right? IAM, let's say IAM admin is there, and then somebody is creating service account, somebody is creating the VMs. So we need auditing as a security operations. Audit logs, by default, audit logs enabled, and also you can enable VPC VPC logs, and any service that you have on Google, you can enable the logs. But any admin activities, they are by default they're logged, and you can go to the cloud logging, and then you can also export the logs. We'll talk about the logging later, but that is another one for your detective activities, right? Controls. Another layer, data now, right? So you have the VPC and your workloads inside. Now you are storing the data on cloud storage or your disks, right? um, so you need to encrypt the data to protect the data. You need to encrypt the data. There are different ways. By default, everything you store on GCP is encrypted, so that is called default encryption. There are other methods. You can bring your own keys, or you can manage on GCP, or you can also manage the keys outside of the GCP and then apply those keys. We'll talk about when it comes to data encryption, but this is to protect and encrypt your data. Even somebody steals the data, so they cannot read the data, right? KMS is the one I was talking about. You store the keys. Key management services is another one service that is to manage your keys. And DLP, we talked about the DLP, to protect your data, and PII data, anonymize, right? And IAM is identity access management. This is what defines who can do what on any of these services, right? So if somebody wants to create a VM, they need to have a VM creator permission. If somebody wants to create a project, they need to have a project creator permission. So this is where you decide who can do what, right? I think we didn't talk about SEC. This is Cloud Security Control Center, Security Command Center. Actually, this is this is this is where you have all the threat analysis, your asset information, and your misconfigurations. This is another single pane of glass security monitoring tool for you. If anybody is working with GCP, especially security side, we can use this as your single pane of glass for security. Moving on, I think we talked about this one in a previous page, but if I go through this one, IAM, right? For the identity access management, what do you do there? User lifecycle, manage application access, and assuring identities, right? Where do you where do you do this, right? Cloud identity and IAM is there as part of GCP. It comes with GCP. And TSV and security keys, it is part of the cloud identity. IAM and cloud identity, these are two different. We'll talk about that one later. What is the difference between cloud identity and IAM? But TSV and security keys are part of cloud identity and account monitoring. This is auditing part of it. Who is creating users, who is logging in, who is attempting to log in and failures. That's part of the cloud identity. And application security, what does GCP has for the application security? Scanning and testing. It's part of security command center. The cloud security scanner is available as part of security command center. And you can also use third-party scanners. And you do have the endpoint protection and vulnerability detection as part of the security scanner, or you can use any third party like Qualys or antivirus. You can use for the vulnerability detection. Infrastructure security side, mainly the VMs. If you take the VMs as a standard practice, always harden your images, and also config management, patch vulnerability management is available on GCP itself. You create the trusted images, and instead of you configure a policy or policy to use only the trusted images, not download from anything from marketplace, right? So that's what you want to control it. Don't download anything. Use hardened images as part of the trusted image, right? And security operations, we talked about it. SCC is one of them, and audit logging is by default enabled. And security command center, you have it's a single pane of glass. Everything is available there, right? Pretty much your misconfigurations, your asset information, inventory information, and yeah, threat analysis also is part of security command center. You can also use integrate. Forseti is an open source security tool, and Qualys and McAfee can integrate with command center, and then all the alerts or findings can be sent to security command center. You can use the security command center. Right. Logging and monitoring. Again, as part of logging and monitoring for your logging, audit logs are available by default. They're enabled. You can export all the logs, aggregated logs, to any SIM. In this case, an example is a Splunk. And if you are using a Forseti, you can send the Forseti findings to any audit logging. Those also can be exported to SIM, or you can also send it to the security command center, as I said earlier. And even Qualys or threat findings, you can anything coming to security command center, you can export, or you can use the security command center as your analysis tool. Data security, we talked about it. Data encryption in transit, and use HTTPS TLS in transit, and data encryption at rest. By default, as I said, it is encrypted. And there are different ways to manage your keys, right? One is default and CMEC. CMEC is a customer managed encryption key. I'll get deeper into these CMECs and CSECs. CMEC is a customer managed encryption. CSEC is customer supplied encryption. And also you have the opportunity to use HSM to further protect your keys, right? The DLP. Network security, we were talking about it earlier. DDoS and WAF protection is available as part of native. And VPC and shared VPC. We'll talk about the difference between VPC and a shared VPC when we're talking about VPCs. But that's part of your VPC security. And IDS, IPS. IDS is a native service in Google Cloud. But if you need an IPS, you need to use a third-party appliance for the IPS. Right? Cloud load balancer is part of it. VPC service controls for your network security. Today we're going to talk about, we're going to cover out of these. We will be covering cloud identity. Let's see how we are looking at time wise. It's a PST 6:36. Probably let's spend some time on cloud identity, and let's see if we have. I can open to for question and answers. Okay. Yeah. Cloud identity and what are the options for authentication, and how do we provision the users and auditing, right? So what does cloud identity do, right? It's just authenticate the users, right? And what so after authentication, and that says who, right? Who can do, right? Authorization is done by identity access management. These are two different products, as I said. Authentication is to done to log in. Once you log in, how do I know what permissions I have? That's where you provide in the IAM, which is identity access management, and auditing is and once I log in, the auditing is enabled, and then it shows who is doing what, right? um, what is cloud identity, right? It's an identity service to manage. You can manage the users, you can manage the groups, and you can define in the cloud identity who can access GCP, right? This is where you'll say, okay, this group of users have access to GCP, or this specific user has access to the GCP, right? For anybody to access GCP, log into the GCP console, or use the SDK, you have to have an account either on Cloud Identity or a Google Workspace. Those are only two choices, right? Um, so yeah, so that's where Cloud Identity is a free product. You don't need to pay for it, but whereas if you go for a Google Workspace, that you need to get the license, right? By user-based license. With the cloud identity, you can give access to, you can manage these all devices. You can manage the devices, you can manage users, you can also give access to apps, and then Google Cloud, Google Workspaces, right? Actually, yeah, Google Workspace also uses the same service to provide access to the workspace. This is what cloud identity provides, right? User lifecycle management. You can create users, you can delete users, suspend users, and secure a account. You can define when can they access, or where they can access. Also, you can define the regions, and you can also create a single sign-on on cloud identity. Also, you can use the cloud identity for SSO, right? And yeah, you can manage the devices. You can control from which device they can access, and you have the reporting and analysis available. You can also provide access to the apps to the users, and you can there, it's API based. Everything on GCP or cloud identity, they are API based. You can have the APIs to talk to each other. Okay. So how cloud identity organized, right? Basically, you can create users manually. Just go to the admin.google.com. You can create the users. At the same time, you can also, as I said, APIs are available. You can use APIs. You can write the code to create users, groups, and you can create the org units. It's like any LDAP, right? You can use any LDAP. You can also add all the users into a CSV file, and then you can upload as a bulk upload, right? That's you can do. Then once you have the users in Google Cloud Identity, you create the groups and then add these users to the groups, right? Then you provide access to the GCP. And once you provide access to the GCP to either a user or a group, then you have the cloud IAM inside the GCP. This is where you give them access to a specific resource. For example, we were talking about a VM. right? If you want a single user or a group to give access to create a VM or to read the VM, you have to provide access here. It's called IAM binding. You have to bind VM creator permission to that specific user so they can create, or Google, any Google Cloud resources that. Um, I was talking about cloud identity is separate and IAM is separate. So these are the yeah. When you log into admin.google.com, that's where the you manage the cloud identity. If you look at on left side, you see the directory, and inside the directory you have users, groups, organization units, like in a LDAP model, right? And you assign the admin roles, and you have the devices. You can manage the devices, you can manage the apps and security. That's where you create the SSOs or integrate with third party SSO or federation. So we'll talk about the federation in a bit. And you have the reporting also that includes your audit logging, and you can enable the user logging and failures. You can export these logs. You can also export these logs to your cloud GCP. And when it comes to the cloud IAM, you have to go to the console.cloud.google.com. That's where your IAM is. IAM is I'm going to talk about more IAM. I think I'm going to talk about it, but yeah. So identity access management, there are different levels. You have at the org level there is an IAM, so you can assign the permissions at the org level, and at the project level, folder level, you have at every level there's an IAM. So you can assign the permissions to the resources at every level. Yeah, I think here is the differentiation between cloud identity, what do you administer, right? You create and manage user accounts, create and managing groups. You can do that in the cloud identity, and assign access and identity. Assign access. But if we are talking about only GCP, you just assign access to the GCP. But there are other apps, right? You can assign up to the apps or workspace or anything, right? And administration roles for users. We can make any user as a admin, but that admin is a different from the Google admin, right? A GCP admin. So that admin is, you can assign a user to create more users, right? Um, or you can assign make a user as a super admin. So we'll talk about the super admins later, but that's administration roles you can assign, right? Enforcing authentication options for user. We're talking about SSO or TSV. Um, yeah. But whereas Google Cloud side, that console IAM, so you can manage the users through console. Go to the console.google.com, cloud.google.com, or gcloud CLI, right? Use the SDK and deploy it on your Mac or anywhere, and then run it from there, right? Gcloud commands. You can also use Terraform to manage the IAM. That's as part of your automation. You can manage the IAM using the Terraform. You can bind the roles, and then API calls. It's typically, even these are all calling the APIs, and if you have APIs, you can call the APIs, right? You can provision cloud platform resources, for example, VMs, projects, or even firewall rules. That's a resource, and yeah, through IAM. You can use any of these, and assign access and identity management roles for cloud platform resources to users. Yeah, to users and groups set in cloud identity. So users are created on cloud identity, and groups are created in cloud identity, right? Once the users are available in cloud identity within your domain, so these are based on domain name, right? Let's say example.com is your domain, so you have to have the cloud identity for example.com, and then your GCP is bind to the example.com. Once you create the user in cloud identity and create a group in cloud identity, you can automatically detect those users and find those users and groups inside the cloud IAM, cloud IAM, right? So you can bind roles to those users that are created in cloud identity. And configuring networking and on-premise integration, you can do that too. You can have multiple domains. Example.com, I gave the example.com, and you can have aliases. Let's say if you have multiple domains, you can add those domains as part of your cloud identity. Now, for example, here company.com, company.co.uk. If you are using a different domain, or for your UK employees, you can add that as part of this cloud identity as an alias, uh, and it'll be part of the single org, right? Yeah, this is the process, decision making for you to create that domain and email set, right? Do you already have? Yeah. So if you follow this decision making process, do you already have a Google Workspace admin domain, right? If you have it, then your policies require complete admin segregation. Does it require you need to separate, right? If it is yes, set up a new cloud, right? In this example, let's take an example. We're talking about example.com, and you already have a workspace for example.com. You're using Gmail, and now you decided to go for a GCP to use the cloud, right? So now you need to make a decision. Can I use the same one, same domain? So you typically your emails and workspace is managed by IT, right? Your IT division. But when it comes to cloud, maybe it's a different division that is managing it. So, so if you need to make a decision, do you want this domain to be managed by your IT team, or do you want to completely separate it? Then you need to go with a different domain. Maybe example1.com, example2.com, create it and create a cloud identity domain, and bind your organization, your cloud organization to that new domain. So these two entities are separately managed. So you need to go through this decision making process and create your cloud identity domain. Yeah, there are two types. I don't want to spend too much time on this one, free versus premium. But there are a few features I want to highlight here. Is if you look all the way go down, um, what is not available. So free will come with 50 users, up to maximum 50 users. But beyond that, if you have it, you need to go with the premium version. And user security management, free and premium, both of them available. And secure LDAP, connect LDAP based apps, right? If you want to port your applications with your cloud identity, right, for the authentication, you need to go with the premium version of it. And Google Security Center, um, if you want to have, as I said, audit logs and everything can be ported to Google Cloud, right? So you need to have the premium version to export all the logs to your security command center. Admin console audit logs, talk about BigQuery export. If you want to view your logs in BigQuery, then you need a premium version. Cloud logging integration, it's the same. That is, logging is integrated. You can send it to cloud logging. Um, yeah, I think these are um, not important. Okay, this is important. There are two types of admin activities in cloud identity, right? One is a super admin, and another one is a org admin. If we hear this a lot about it, right? Super admin is it's the so in cloud identity, when you create a org, right? When you create a cloud identity domain, you become a super admin automatically. And super admins exist in only in cloud identity. Okay. Once you are a super admin in cloud identity, you will become GCP org admin by default. They'll always get that permission. So what does org admin can do on GCP? They can do anything, right? So they are at the top level administration. They can create projects. give permissions to other users, create more bindings, and everything can be done as an org admin. And the super admins, they can manage users, groups, account lifecycle, org security settings. As it says, super admins, they can manage cloud identity, anything inside the cloud identity, user management, user lifecycle, and also they can manage everything on GCP, right? But whereas org admins, they don't have any access to the cloud identity. Org admin, any user can be org admin. Super admin, by default, they'll be org admin. But let's say Raj at example.com, I'm not a super admin. But on the IAM side, if you go to the GCP, and I can be assigned as an org admin, now I can do anything on GCP side, but nothing on cloud identity side. I only be able to use a regular user. I just log in and then use the GCP. That's the difference between a super admin and org admin, right? And super admin is managed in admin console, which is cloud identity admin console, and org admins are managed in Google Cloud Console, right? Or with, as I said, Terraform or CLI. Right? So visibility, cloud identity, and Google Cloud environments. So you can see super admin users both sides, and org admin permissions are only visible on cloud environment. Right? Here it says cloud identity super admin is not same as organization admin, right? IAM org admin. Here are a few best practices recommendations. Protect every super admin with security key, right? Make sure you have either Titan security key or MFA 2SV for the super admins, because that super admin, if it is compromised, your cloud identity is compromised as well as your GCP is compromised, right? So to make sure, if you have um, super admin, multiple super admins, all of them are secured with a security key. The best thing is to use the Titan security key, so you don't lose it. Do not use super admin as a regular account. Don't use your super admin for your administration activities. Most of us try to use, we create the cloud identity and use the same user for GCP management also. If you are following A account and B account, make sure you are not using your A accounts for your day-to-day job. Those should be used only as needed basis, right? Super admin has a powerful set of permissions. You don't need that for your day-to-day activities, right? And limit the number of super admin accounts. Make sure you're not having too many, maybe 3 or 4 at the maximum, for the high availability purpose, right? If one person is not available, other person should be able to take care of it. So limit, you shouldn't have too many super admin accounts as a best practice. And apply the principle of least privileges, leveraging pre-built or custom admin roles. We'll talk about the pre-built roles. And custom admin roles is when you are assigning roles, make sure you only assign a specific role. So as we all know, that least privilege roles, right? So make sure only what is needed for that user, right? And by the way, so if you are integrating with third-party single sign-on like Okta or Ping Identity, for the SSO, super admins, they don't go through any third-party SSOs. They bypass the SSO. All right. If you need to admin, so you need to remember that one. That's why it's strongly recommended you use the security key for it, and don't use it for your day-to-day activities. Yeah. Your key decisions you need to know before you go and create. But if you're already using it, you're already using it. But how many domains you need? What will be the primary domain for your cloud identity? Which cloud identity offering will be used? Right, premium or free version, and who will be the super admin? So you need to decide when you're creating your cloud identity. Make sure you have all this information handy. All right. I have 5 more minutes we have That's all about cloud identity. But I'll quickly walk through the authentication options. We talked about cloud identity, but let's go through other options also. Let's see, maybe we need to extend a little bit longer. User authentication options, right? Google authentication, no SSO. That's one way, right? Just go create user in cloud identity and then just use login, right? That's one way. Second one is single sign-on. You can use Okta, as I said, Ping Identity, and Azure DevOps, Azure AD. You can use it for the single sign-on. So you can also integrate with third party, right? That's an option. And 2SP with Google authentication, if you are already using Google Authenticator. Is it Authenticator? I think it's Authenticator, right? You can use that one. So you will get the OTP generated for you, and then you can use it. But for best activity, as a best practice, right? Use the security key for your super admins here, right? Um, 2SV, there are multiple ways, right? You can get it over the, you can use the Google Authenticator to generate the TSV, or you can use the SMS method, or you can download your keys and you can use that. But those are still vulnerable, right? So the best way, use the keys for the security key, for the physical security key for the super admins. These are the hardware keys you can order, and you can program your security key, and it has to be there always. When you're authenticating, you use the key and your thumb impression to um, authenticate. SSO authentication with third party. The good thing about that is um, you can integrate all your, you have a single place for authentications. GCP is not only thing for you, right? So you might have other applications, your on-prem applications you have, so all need to be authenticated, right? Instead of configuring all these users at one place authentication, you can use a single source of authentication, and you can leverage the existing authentication model, right? But the downsides of it is you're not leveraging the Google security features, and they may vary from different vendors. The security may vary from vendors to vendors, right? Third-party SSO software, you need to subscribe for another third party. But if you already have it, I would uh, I would use it, right? Yeah, I always have to remember that super admins, they don't go through the SSO. They are authenticated by cloud identity itself and use the security keys. Here is how you integrate third party. Um, the typical architecture is going to be, if you have the cloud identity on the right side, right? GCDS is Google released Google Cloud Directory Service. This is used to sync your AD. Let's say you have a AD at home, on-prem. Your is either Azure AD or Microsoft Active Directory, any Active Directory third-party LDAP. You can use the GCDS to sync the users with cloud identity. You don't have to sync the passwords, just sync the username. As I said earlier, right? If you have to access the GCP, you have to have account in cloud identity or Google Workspace, one of those, right? So as long as you have the user here, sync the user, either use the GCDS, or even Azure has sync also. You can use the Azure sync to sync the users. Um, and once the user exists, when you try to log in, it identifies, okay, there is a user, and then you configure the single sign-on with third-party SSOs, and then it will be redirected to third-party SSO to authenticate, and then the tokens as processed, right? Token is generated, and the access is given to you. User provisioning. As always, right? If you have the cloud identity, basically that's used for your user lifecycle. You can provision the users on cloud identity itself. But if you're using your, let's say, any enterprise, any corporate, they must be already using an Active Directory, right? If it is an existing company, you might have the Active Directory already, or one of them Azure or your Windows on-prem or another one. You might already have the SSO already established if you are moving to cloud now. So one way to use, you want to use existing users. You don't want to create new users, right? But you want to selectively give access to your users. That's where you integrate, you sync the users, create the integration between your AD and cloud identity, and sync which, identify the users that you want to sync, give access to GCP, and sync only those users. Either use the Google GCDS or Azure or Ping Okta. You can configure Okta also to sync the users, right? Um, we can use those, one of those best practices. And your users are managed on AD. So cloud identity, you won't do anything. Once you configure the sync and users are in sync, automatically sync, that's it, done. Your users are continuously managed, what you were doing earlier on AD, your on-prem side. So there is nothing to do on cloud identity side, except if you want to do anything with the super admin users. For example, conflict accounts. What are conflict accounts, right? Let's say you decided to move on to the GCP, but you already have some users using cloud identity with your domain name. And what do I do with them? They are created with their Gmail account or something. So what do I do with those accounts, right? They already integrated with maybe Google Ads or some other applications, APIs. They're using it. You cannot get rid of them, right? How do I take care of those accounts? You don't want those to be left over and then somebody else, the individual users managing. You want to bring them into your organization and then manage through your IT, right? So there are tools to manage your conflict accounts. You can create separate arcs inside your cloud identity and take over those accounts as part of the organization, and either create separate group or separate org and manage them separately. But those are managed by the super admins now versus individual users. As I said, auditing is very important for security operations. All admin activities are audited, recorded, and logs are available in reporting on cloud identity side. And those logs can be sent to the cloud logging by default. You can configure to send it to cloud logging, and then they're available on cloud logging. Now you can you can scan, you can send it to security command center, or you can send it to your SIM. If you already have the SIM like Splunk, you can send those logs, and then you can do the log analysis for yourself. IAM is another one. We talked about it, but I just quickly want to go through the there are so we talked about IAM. User accounts has to exist in the cloud identity, right? We create the user in cloud identity, create the group cloud identity, and then we bind the permissions IAM. So those permissions are basically create a VM, create a network, create a firewall rules. That's what we do, right? But there is another type of accounts in GCP, service accounts. If you are familiar with the cloud, you know the service accounts. Service accounts, um, service accounts are they don't service accounts are used for programming, programming um, your access, right? So if you want to use an account inside your code, you can use the service accounts. Or if you create a VM and you want to give some access to those VMs to other resources, like for example cloud storage, right? If your VM needs to access to your storage, then you attach a service account to the VM, and then VM automatically, whatever the permissions bind, whatever the roles you assign to those service accounts, the VM will get it. Service accounts cannot have access to the console. They are only used for the programming, right? And these accounts, service accounts, are created in IAM, in GCP itself, and then you bind the permissions to the service accounts as a regular user, but they cannot have the console access. But you can, a regular user can impersonate as a service account and run commands as that service accounts from the user. But you need to go through, you need that user have to have a permission to use the service account, right? Yeah, these are a few recommendations you can create. It is always recommended. Let me see if I have it here. Network admins. Yeah, these are some recommendations where at the org level, org admins define IAM policies, determine structure of the resource hierarchy, which is folders and subfolders and project hierarchy. And org admins can create projects until org is mature, right? And network admins. Another network admins, typical network admin, you create the network, you create firewall rules, right? Unless you have another team to manage the firewall rules, a security team. If you have a security team who manage the firewall rules, then create a network admin group and then give them only permissions to manage the networks, VPC network or VPNs or routers or anything. And security admin, they are responsible for establishing the security policies, security controls, who can access what. If it is a firewall rules, then which resources have access to what. And also IAM is managed by your security team also, like bindings, right? IAM bindings, who can have access to what. Billing admins, um, billing admins, they have access to the billing, as well as creating the billing accounts or monitoring the billing usage. Yeah, these are example of, so okay, here is a good example that we were talking about organization, folders, projects, everything, right? Here is an example of it, right? This is the root level org. We call this one as an organization, which is an example.com, your domain, right? That's where under the organization you have the folders. Under the folders, in this case, in this example, there are no subfolders. You can create subfolders. Under the subfolders, you can have your projects. The projects will have the resources, actual resources. Each resource is, this is a VM and storage buckets and logging and everything you can have under inside the projects. Everything is inside the project. Folders are you're separating the uh, basically you're logically separating your resources folders. Yeah, it is an example of org admin group, right? If you have a org admin role, they manage the resources at the org level. You can have the folder admins and project creators and org role admin and billing account users. You talked about network admin and security admin. So yeah, this is if you look at this one, these are the activities you do at the org level, right? Org admin, network admin, security admin, billing admin, where they create the folders, they create the projects, they create the networks, they create firewall rules and everything. But now it comes to actual the people who manages the resources. Those are DevOps teams, deploy resources, developers. They want to deploy the code and then deploy resources inside the projects itself. Data analytics, they need to access the data, BigQuery or DBS, right? So those are at the project level, or sometimes it could be folder level also. You create groups and then assign the bindings at the project level so that they can manage these resources, actual resources inside the projects. So there are different DevOps engineers. They need to be able to logging admins. They can create. I mean, you don't create the logging, but they can use the logging, cloud logging, and monitoring alerts. They should be able to create an error reporting admins, right? Codas. There is another feature that So how many VMs they can create, right? How many firewall rules you can create. So the quota administrators, they can request for more quotas. They need to have the folder viewer, compute admin, and GKE admins. Developers, these are DevOps engineers, where they manage your resources, right? Including logging, deploying VMs, deploying firewall. Not the firewall rules. Firewall rules are done by the security team or network team, but compute, right? They should be able to deploy and manage. When it comes to developers, what does the developers do? They deploy the code, write the code, and deploy the code and manage the resources, right? So they should be able to deploy the compute engine and deploy the code. Yeah, I think I'll stop here.